Governments love to promise financial freedom. They talk about prosperity, opportunity, stability, as if they're building a system designed to help ordinary people rise. But if you examine history carefully, a darker pattern emerges. For thousands of years, governments have relied on quiet, financial tricks to keep citizens dependent while wealth and power drift upward. None of these tricks are new. They're simply repackaged every generation, dressed in new language and sold as progress. The purpose is always the same: enrich the top, control the middle, and keep everyone else too busy, too tired, or too confused to question what's happening. One of the oldest tricks is also the easiest to hide: inflation. When a government spends more than it collects through taxes, it faces a choice. It can raise taxes openly, which angers voters, or it can secretly reduce the value of the money people already hold. Ancient Rome perfected this strategy over time. Emperors facing enormous military expenses diluted the precious metal inside the denarius. A coin that once contained almost pure silver slowly became a copper disc coated with a thin silver glaze. They pretended nothing had changed, but citizens paid dearly. Prices soared, savings lost their value, and wages couldn't keep up. It was a silent tax that nobody voted for. Today, central banks play the same game with digital money instead of metal coins. The tool has changed, but the trick hasn't. In the Middle Ages, the tactic evolved. Kings in England, France, and Spain routinely demanded loans from wealthy merchants and guilds. The word loan was a polite disguise. Refusal meant punishment, seizure of property, or prison. Sometimes the crown promised repayment with interest. Usually the repayment came late, in weakened currency, or not at all. Monarchs funded their wars and luxuries, while those who actually built the economy were forced into patriotic obedience. Coercion dressed as duty, a formula that worked perfectly for centuries. By the 17th century, governments found a more sophisticated method. When Britain created the Bank of England in 1694, it wasn't to help the public. The government needed money for war. Wealthy investors bought bonds. The crown promised interest and taxes on everyday items: bread, beer, salt, cloth, guaranteed those interest payments. The poor paid the tax burden. The wealthy earned risk-free income from lending to the government. It was a wealth transfer machine wrapped in the respectable language of national finance. The safest investment became lending to governments, and the profit always flowed upward. In the modern world, the tricks didn't disappear, they multiplied. Governments borrow aggressively, issue mountains of debt, and justify it with promises of jobs, infrastructure, and social programs. But a massive share of that money funnels toward defense contractors, corporate subsidies, and bailouts for industries that made reckless decisions. When the bill arrives, governments rarely cut spending at the top. Instead, they raise taxes on the public, inflate the currency, or reduce benefits, shifting the burden downward while profits flow upward to bondholders and investors. Then there are bailouts, one of the clearest tricks of all. In 2008, major banks made catastrophic gambling mistakes. When their bets exploded, governments rushed to rescue them with taxpayer money. Ordinary people paid to save institutions that had nearly destroyed the global economy. And after the dust settled, those same banks emerged richer, larger, and more powerful. Gains were private, losses were public. The system survived, but at the expense of the people who trusted it. Even retirement systems are built on sleight of hand. For decades, workers in countries like the US and UK contributed to government-managed pension programs, believing the money was being saved. In reality, most of that money was spent instantly, replaced by government IOUs. Future generations would pay for current retirees. It works only as long as populations grow and taxpayers outnumber retirees. But once demographics shift, the system strains and governments respond by raising the retirement age, cutting benefits, or inflating away payouts. A generational shell game disguised as a social contract. Notice the pattern. Every trick depends on perception. Inflation becomes economic growth. Forced loans become national duty. Debt becomes investment. Bailouts become stability. Pension cuts become necessary reforms. The language is crafted to hide the real purpose. transferring wealth and power upward while keeping the majority compliant. And the reason these tricks keep working is simple. Most people don't study economic history, don't understand financial systems, and cannot recognize old traps hidden in new packaging. In recent decades, governments and central banks have added even more advanced techniques. After the 2008 crisis, the world learned a new term, quantitative easing. Central banks created trillions out of thin air to buy government bonds and financial assets. Markets recovered. Asset prices boomed. Stocks, corporate bonds, and real estate soared. But who owned the majority of those assets? The wealthy. For regular people, wages barely moved while living costs exploded. The new money went straight to the top, and the public was told it was necessary to protect the economy. The truth, it protected the elite, not the average household. Governments also rely on stealth taxation, indirect methods that shrink your purchasing power without ever announcing a tax raise. Sales taxes, fuel taxes, hidden fees, and above all, inflation. When prices rise faster than your salary, the gap is a tax on your living standards. Governments love inflation because it devalues their debts. But citizens lose real wealth even as their paychecks appear larger on paper. You feel richer but live poorer. A perfect illusion. Another trick is regulatory capture. On paper, regulations protect the public, safety rules, financial oversight, consumer rights. But powerful industries from railroads to oil companies to tech giants have repeatedly shaped those regulations to serve their interests. They influence the very agencies meant to keep them in check. The government looks like a referee, but the biggest players write the rule book. The public sees protection, insiders see profit. War finance is just as deceptive. During World War I and II, governments sold war bonds as patriotic contributions. Citizens believed they were helping their nation, and they were. But wealthy bondholders earned safe, government-guaranteed profits paid by future taxpayers. The same pattern continues in modern conflict. CTS, trillions spent on wars in Iraq and Afghanistan enriched defense contractors, banks, and investors. Generations will pay for wars long after they end. Temporary emergencies become permanent debts, and perhaps the most effective trick of all, complexity. Governments bury financial decisions under layers of jargon, enormous budgets, and impossibly complicated tax codes. When a system becomes too complex to follow, it becomes too complex to challenge. Ordinary citizens cannot track where money flows, who benefits, or who is responsible. Complexity becomes camouflage, the modern version of Rome hiding copper coins beneath a shimmer of silver. Why does all this matter today? Because these tricks haven't stopped, they've accelerated. Inflation quietly drains your savings. National debts climb ever higher. Bailouts remain the default response whenever markets shiver. Central banks manipulate the money supply, while governments shift financial burdens through taxes, fees, and currency devaluation. The result is a system that keeps ordinary people working harder for less real wealth, while those at the top face minimal risk and maximum reward. The mechanisms change, but the outcome has been identical for centuries. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Most people will never escape these traps because they don't realize they're in one. They accept inflation as natural, taxes as inevitable, and government narratives as truth. Ignorance becomes the strongest tool of control. If people don't know the history, they cannot see the repetition. That's why financial literacy is discouraged and economic history rarely taught. Understanding money is power, and governments rarely share power willingly. So what should you learn from all of this? First, never accept official explanations at face value. When governments announce stimulus, look at who benefits first. When inflation rises, remember it is often a deliberate policy choice. When new regulations appear, follow the trail to see who influenced them. Second, build real wealth, assets that hold value even when currencies don't. Third, never assume the system is designed to help you just because it claims to. Systems exist to protect themselves. History proves that again and again. History doesn't repeat perfectly, but it rhymes loudly. The same tricks that drained Roman citizens, manipulated medieval merchants, And strained workers in the 20th century are draining your bank account today, wrapped in modern language and backed by modern institutions. The only real difference is whether you can recognize the pattern before it hurts you. If this opened your eyes, make sure to subscribe. The answers are written in history, and I'll help you uncover every one of them.